Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we sift through the noise to bring you the essential knowledge and surprising insights that truly make you well-informed. Today, we're plunging headfirst into one of the most fundamental, yet, endlessly debated concepts in American history: freedom. This isn't just some abstract ideal. It's an idea that has been the driving force behind movements, the spark of conflicts, the architect of policies, and, well, quite frankly, the source of profound, often tragic contradictions throughout America's past. Our mission today is to unpack a wealth of sources, from early colonial accounts all the way to modern historical analyses, to truly understand how freedom has been defined, redefined, and fought for by different groups across centuries. Consider this your fast track to being deeply versed in a journey that is both complex and consistently surprising. We'll be drawing from historical crash courses covering, well, everything from the foundational debates of the early republic and 19th century reforms, all the way through the world wars, the civil rights movement, and even contemporary politics.
And what's truly illuminating here, you see, is how fluid the very definition of freedom has been. It shifts, sometimes dramatically, based on who is doing the defining and the specific historical moment they inhabit. This immediately brings us to a crucial question for you to ponder. Can one single static concept of freedom ever genuinely serve everyone? Or is it inherently, perhaps tragically, exclusive, leaving certain groups deliberately outside its embrace? Let's begin our exploration.
Defining freedom in the early republic, contradictions at the core.
Okay, so we begin at America's birth, right? A period steeped in powerful rhetoric about liberty. You know, the stirring declarations, the soaring ideals of self-evident truths. But when you really delve into our sources, a far more complex reality emerges, this founding paradox where the promise of freedom, so passionately articulated, was explicitly not extended to everyone.
It's exactly. The American Revolution's ideals of liberty and equality, while undeniably transformative and, inspiring a nation, were far from universally applied. While the newly formed states did expand voting rights, primarily to white male property owners, and while we saw the nascent beginnings of true religious freedom and a decline in things like apprenticeship and indentured servitude, the leap to actual freedom for all was explicitly not made by many of the founders.
Right. And the most glaring contradiction, obviously, centers on slavery. It's striking to see figures like Thomas Jefferson, who drafted a condemnation of slavery into the Declaration of Independence, a passage later removed, by the way, still maintaining enslaved people. Our sources reveal that many founders, Jefferson included, believe their amazing life, their economic well-being, fundamentally depended on this forced labor.
Yeah, it's a stark reality. Yet there were dissenting voices, even if they were in the minority. James Otis of Massachusetts famously challenged this hypocrisy, asking, "What man is or ever was born free if every man is not?" And here's a sort of surprising twist our sources highlight. For some enslaved people, loyalty to Britain during the war actually offered a path to liberty.
Really?
How so? Well, Lord Dunmore's proclamation, for instance, led about 5,000 enslaved individuals to fight for the British. This contributed to a significant growth in the overall free Black American population, from fewer than 10,000 in 1776 to nearly 200,000 by 1810.
Wow. So the war for American independence was, for some, a war for their personal freedom from their American enslavers.
That's a crucial point, yeah. It underscores how deeply intertwined the economic realities and deeply ingrained social structures were with those abstract ideals of liberty. The economic framework of the new nation often just superseded the very principles it claimed to uphold.
And it wasn't just enslaved people. Women, too, despite their vital participation in the revolution, gained surprisingly little directly in terms of legal or political freedom.
Right. Coverture laws, the ones that legally subsumed a woman's identity and property under her husband's control, kept them under their husband's legal and economic authority.
So no property rights, basically shut out of politics.
Exactly. And a new ideal emerged, dubbed Republican motherhood. The idea was that women's civic role was primarily to educate their sons in the principles of liberty and government.
So an expansion of education, yes, but
still within a very constrained definition of a woman's role, right? Claimed solely around perpetuating male citizenship.
in this pattern of limited freedom, it extended to Native Americans as well, didn't it? Tragically so.
Many tribes, like the powerful Iroquois and Cherokees, were initially encouraged by the colonists to stay neutral in this family quarrel between America and Old England. Yet, internal divisions within tribes or strategic alliances led some to fight for the British.
And the consequences were brutal.
Absolutely. They faced horrific American retaliation, burning villages, enslaving prisoners. It highlights a recurring, deeply uncomfortable theme in American history. Freedom for one group often came at the explicit cost of another's subjugation.
So, okay, the ink is drying on the Constitution, and this fundamental debate emerges that would shape the economic soul of the new nation. What kind of country would America truly be? What would economic freedom really mean?
It's truly fascinating, yeah. You see how two dominant, almost diametrically opposed visions for the new nation's economic structure immediately took root, each carrying its own distinct understanding of freedom. On one side, you had Alexander Hamilton and his Federalists. They championed a strong central government, promoting manufacturing, trade.
Leaning towards Britain, economically speaking.
Right. Their vision was of an elite-led nation, one that prioritized protecting patents, building an essential infrastructure to facilitate robust commerce. Their famous five-point plan included establishing the nation's creditworthiness, creating a national debt, kind of cleverly designed to give wealthy citizens a direct stake in the country's success.
Ah, right. Give them skin in the game.
Exactly. Plus, establishing a national bank, implementing a whiskey tax, and imposing tariffs to encourage domestic industry.
And that whiskey tax didn't go over well, did it?
Not at all. It sparked the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794. Washington himself personally led troops, unequivocally asserting the federal government's nascent, strong power.
Wow. And then the other side, Jefferson.
In stark contrast, you had Thomas Jefferson and his Republicans. They passionately championed an agrarian republic, envisioning a nation primarily comprised of small, independent farmers. They were deeply wary of concentrated economic or governmental power, preferring a strong relationship with revolutionary France.
Saw themselves as the defenders against tyranny.
Precisely. And our sources specifically highlight Jefferson's profound worry that factory workers, entirely dependent on employers for their wages, would be inherently unfree.
Unfit citizens, in his view, unable to exercise independent judgment.
Yes, a direct philosophical challenge to Hamilton's manufacturing-driven vision. The core insight here is that America's economic soul was never simple. It was forged in this fundamental tension between collective national power and individual autonomy, a tension that honestly persists as the core of every economic debate today.
Now, here's where it gets particularly insightful for me. Even in the earliest days, that tension between government power and individual liberty was palpable. Our sources reveal how quickly the idea of a strong central authority became necessary, yet simultaneously ignited fierce controversy over the very nature of American freedom.
Precisely. The initial model, the Articles of Confederation, was deliberately weak, right?
Yeah, proved pretty ineffective. Couldn't collect taxes effectively.
Made international trade a nightmare, as one source puts it. And its fundamental weakness was starkly highlighted by Shays' Rebellion, that farmer uprising in Massachusetts.
But it did achieve some things, right? Winning the war, the Northwest Ordinance.
True, it did. The Northwest Ordinance, outlawing slavery in new states, was hugely significant for the future of freedom. But those limitations ultimately necessitated the creation of a stronger constitution, which in turn immediately sparked furious debates about the scope of federal power and its potential impact on individual liberty.
So you have the Federalist Papers, Hamilton, Madison, arguing passionately for a strong government, but with checks and balances to prevent tyranny. Yet, even within that framework, questions about the limits of liberty popped up immediately. Our sources, for example, muse provocatively about the Second Amendment.
Ah, yes. Originally intended for citizens to protect themselves from a standing army with their own arms.
Right. And the sources ask, if that principle were applied literally today, would it grant the right to own drones? Or even, quote, suitcase nukes?
It's a thought experiment, yeah, that underscores how much interpretations of freedom can stretch and evolve over time.
Meanwhile, the anti-federalists, mainly small farmers, they worried intensely about a strong, wealthy, dominated government.
They did. They viewed a large United States as potentially an empire, fundamentally incompatible with Republican principles, and feared an elite controlling their destiny.
And this tension, state power versus individual liberty, it quickly showed up in actual laws, didn't it? Like the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Oh, absolutely. The Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. Amidst widespread anti-French hysteria, John Adams's administration pushed these through. They lengthened the citizenship period for immigrants and, most controversially, criminalized criticism of the government.
Wow. Criminalized criticism.
Yeah. While these acts were thankfully allowed to lapse under Jefferson's presidency, they serve as a potent early example of how, as our sources put it, even something as basic as freedom of speech was up for grabs in the nascent American experiment.
A stark reminder that the rights we often take for granted now were fiercely contested from the get-go. So as you reflect on this early push and pull, individual rights, collective good, government power. What insights does it offer about the very foundations of American governance and freedom that still resonate with us today? It's clear that from day one, freedom wasn't a singular, agreed-upon concept, but a dynamic, contested battlefield.
19th century transformations broadening the fight for freedom.
Okay, moving into the 19th century, America industrialized, expanded, and the very nature of work, community, even belief shifted dramatically. This profoundly challenged traditional notions of freedom and spurred entirely new social movements, right?
Absolutely. One of the most significant transformations was the market revolution. That profound shift from a largely subsistence economy, where people produce mostly for their own needs, to a market economy driven by buying and selling. This reshaped daily life, creating unprecedented prosperity for some, but also introducing new forms of dependence and arguably unfreedom for many others.
And technology was key here. Steamboats, canals.
Totally. Robert Fulton's Claremont in 1807 showed steam power's potential. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, was a game-changer, connecting the Midwest to New York City, making it the premier port. By 1837, over 3,000 miles of canals crisscrossed the nation. Then add railroads, the telegraph, knitting the nation together, moving goods and information faster than ever before.
And factories spreading beyond New England.
Right. Initially concentrated in New England's textile mills, they began to spread to the Midwest with steam power, truly embedding industrialization across the landscape.
But these leaps, technologically and economically, had a huge impact on individual lives, especially workers, often challenging.
Definitely. Our sources highlight that work became increasingly regulated by the clock rather than by natural rhythms or personal inclination, people working for strict wages. This directly undermined Jefferson's earlier ideal of the independent farmer. Factory workers found themselves dependent on employers and, by Jefferson's logic, potentially unfree.
Right, and those early textile mills, Lowell, Massachusetts, employing young farm girls. New opportunities maybe, but limited.
Often very limited and tightly controlled, yes. And the psychological toll of this new industrial labor. It's famously captured in Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener.
The I would prefer not to guy.
Exactly. Our sources cite it as an illustration of the struggle to find meaning in repetitive, soul-crushing industrial work, where individuals might just prefer not to engage with the system.
Beyond economics, though, there was this powerful spiritual awakening sweeping the nation, right? Igniting reform movements.
Yes, the Second Great Awakening. A massive Protestant revival over decades, emphasizing individual choice and salvation, a direct relationship with Jesus. This resonated remarkably well with the burgeoning individualism of the market revolution. That's kind of ironic, even as some preachers critiqued the perceived selfishness of the free market, there was effectively a market for new religions and preachers traveling the country.
Huh, a market for religion.
In a way, yeah. Crucially, this revival sparked the belief in perfectionism, the radical idea that both individuals and society were capable of unlimited moral and social improvement, driving towards a more perfect world.
And that fueled all sorts of reform efforts.
Absolutely. Became a powerful driving force behind a multitude of them.
Like the temperance movement. Our sources say Americans back then were uncommonly drunk.
It's putting it mildly. Consuming a staggering 7 gallons of liquor per capita in 1830, more than double today's rate.
Wow.
So reformers, driven by Protestant ideals of restraint and social order, sought to limit or ban alcohol entirely. Highly controversial, though.
Especially with immigrants like Germans and Irish, different cultural views.
Exactly. Their culture and church morality often differed on alcohol, and women became incredibly powerful advocates here. Figures like Carrie Nation, with her hatchet,
Can't forget her.
and Frances Willard, leading the Women's Christian Temperance Union, 150,000 members by 1890. They saw temperance as a direct path to protecting families from drunken husbands.
Yeah.
And crucially, as a way to gain vital rights for themselves, property control, divorce, and ultimately the vote. Their fight for temperance was, in essence, a fight for their own domestic freedom and agency.
That broader reform impulse also led to more institutions, right? Asylums, poorhouses.
Yes, a significant societal shift towards institutional solutions. We saw the widespread construction of asylums and other homes for outcasts, hundreds built in the 19th century, reflecting a desire to address social problems through organized, often isolated institutions.
And schools, common schools.
Similarly, common schools, publicly funded schools, open to all gained significant traction, particularly in the North. All northern states had public school systems by 1860.
Despite some parents not wanting government moral instruction?
Right, but they were far less common in the South. The planter class feared widespread education for poor whites, and especially for enslaved people, saw it as a direct threat to their established social order. But if we connect all this to the bigger picture, the fight against slavery really emerged as the defining struggle for freedom in the 19th century. It influenced, often overshadowed, every other reform movement. It forced the nation to confront its deepest hypocrisy.
Our sources confirm that. While challenges to slavery existed earlier from enslaved people themselves, free black individuals, Quakers the early 19th century also saw colonizationism gain some ground, like the American Colonization Society establishing Liberia.
Right. But ultimately, abolitionism, the immediate uncompensated end to slavery, became the biggest reform movement because, as one source starkly puts it, slavery was the worst. It was an inherent evil that couldn't be reconciled with the nation's stated ideals, demanded a fundamental redefinition of what human freedom truly meant.
And the response to abolitionism was often incredibly violent.
Shockingly so. We hear about the burning of Pennsylvania Hall, a Quaker meeting house used for abolitionist meetings, in 1838, and the tragic murder of anti-slavery newspaper editor Elijah P. Lovejoy in Illinois in 1837. This is the fifth time his newspaper had been destroyed by a mob.
Fifth time, and even Congress tried to shut down discussion. The gag rule.
Exactly. Adopted in 1836 to suppress free speech on slavery, preventing petitions and discussions. Yet, despite this deep fear and repression, the movement gained powerful momentum, notably through Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, sold over 1 million copies between 1851 and 1854.
And despite the writing style maybe not being timeless.
Our sources call it unreadable, heavy-handed prose, but it profoundly humanized slaves for millions of readers in the North, led directly to its widespread banning in the South. The sheer emotional impact was undeniable in shaping public opinion.
And it's vital to recognize the role of black abolitionists like Frederick Douglass.
Absolutely crucial and often overlooked. His very existence, his powerful rhetoric, his personal story directly challenged the prevalent claims of inherent black inferiority. Douglass and others battled not only slavery, but also the near ubiquitous racism that permeated society, often even within the abolitionist movement itself.
The source compared it to Pat Boone re-recording Little Richard.
Yeah, to make it safe for the white kids, a telling comparison. Significantly, many women abolitionists, Maria Stewart, the Grimke sisters, Sarah and Angelina, began to draw profound connections between their own subordinate roles and those of enslaved people. As our sources point out, this effectively chipped away at the prevailing idea of a woman's place being solely in the home, expanding their understanding of what personal freedom entailed.
But the American dream of freedom also pushed westward relentlessly. And here, too, the definition of who was free was constantly negotiated, often brutally, creating fresh, agonizing contradictions.
Yeah, that westward expansion was undeniably driven by manifest destiny, that fervent belief that God-given right of Americans to spread out across the continent. This led to acquiring vast new territories, but it immediately reignited the seemingly intractable debate over slavery's expansion, a conflict that ultimately proved impossible to resolve peacefully, pushing the nation toward civil war.
Texas is a key example, isn't it? Mexico had abolished slavery.
Right, but initially allowed Americans to bring enslaved people into the territory. However, as the American population swelled, quickly outnumbering the Tejanos, Mexico got nervous. They annulled land contracts, banned further emigration, which directly led to conflict, and eventually Texas's annexation by the U.S.
And this expansionist impulse continued with the Mexican-American War, gaining California and the Southwest.
Exactly. And California's admission as a state in 1850 brought these tensions right to a head, starkly. Its state constitution explicitly limited civil participation to whites denying the vote, and even court testimony to Asians, black people, and Native Americans.
And the treatment of Native Americans there was horrific.
Brutal. Removed from mineral-rich lands, thousands of orphan children sold as slaves. Their population plummeted from 150,000 to just 30,000 by 1860. And California's request for free statehood sparked a major crisis, since half its territory lay below the Missouri Compromise line, directly challenging the balance of power.
Leading to the Compromise of 1850, Henry Clay's big effort to kick the can down the road.
Essentially, yeah. A desperate attempt. It admitted California as free, outlawed the slave trade, not slavery itself, in D.C., enacted a much harsher fugitive slave law that deeply angered many Northerners.
That fugitive slave law was a huge point of contention.
Huge. And it introduced popular sovereignty, allowing white inhabitants of new territories to decide on slavery for themselves. Our sources point out this starkly highlights how, quote, nothing protects the rights of minorities like the tyranny of the majority when fundamental human rights are left to a vote.
Oof, yeah. And then the Kansas-Nebraska Act, more popular sovereignty.
Yes, pushed by Stephen Douglas in 1854. Applied popular sovereignty there, effectively repealing the Missouri Compromise and leading directly to the violence of Bleeding Kansas. Northerners increasingly saw slave state expansion as a direct threat to their economic self-interest in the West, a place where white individuals could become self-sufficient farmers without competing with slave labor.
And then came Dred Scott, the Supreme Court decision.
Dred Scott v. Sanford in 1857. Our sources unequivocally label it the court's worst decision. Ruled that Scott remained enslaved and, shockingly, that black people, whether enslaved or free, had no rights which the white man was bound to respect.
Just outrageous. And factually wrong, too, right? Black Americans had exercised rights before.
Demonstrably false, yes. It further inflamed Northerners, deepened the divide. The stage was undeniably set. John Brown's Harper's Ferry raid in 1859, his execution, became a martyr's call. He grimly prophesied that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away, but with blood. A chilling prediction of the Civil War, a conflict ultimately fought over the very definition of freedom.
So, looking back at the 19th century, these movements, this expansion, how do they illustrate that continuous, often violent struggle to expand freedom's promise, while simultaneously revealing those deep, painful contradictions in American ideals? It was a period where the very soul of American liberty was forged and tested under immense pressure.
Industrialization and the progressive era redefining freedom in a modern economy.
Okay, transitioning into the Gilded Age, post-Civil War, we see rapid economic changes, explosive industrialization, leading to widespread political corruption. Yet, this very corruption also became the catalyst for new ideas about what freedom looked like in a modern economy and how government might secure it.
It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? Immense, unprecedented wealth alongside deep-seated political rot. Urban political machines like NYC's Tammany Hall epitomize this, engaged in honest graft through real estate deals, controlled city contracts and jobs. But it's important to acknowledge they also provided valuable services to immigrants and other poor people.
Like quarters, clothes, jobs, in exchange for votes.
Exactly. Highlights how these corrupt systems could, ironically, serve a vital, albeit problematic, purpose, stepping in where formal government services were lacking. Raises questions about what freedom means when basic needs depend on illicit political favors.
And the corruption wasn't just local. National scandals hit the federal government, too.
Oh yeah. Sources point to the Credit Mobilier scandal, involving bribery of Republican congressmen tied to railroad construction, and the whiskey ring. Tax evasion by distillers involving grand administration officials. Deeply tainted Congress and the presidency.
Yet some reform did happen, the Civil Service Act.
Right. The Civil Service Act of 1883, prompted by President Garfield's assassination by a disgruntled office seeker, created a merit system for 10% of federal employees, a small but significant step towards professionalism over patronage, a different idea of how jobs should be earned.
But connecting this to the bigger picture, genuine reform, expanding freedom, was much less developed, even actively suppressed in the South, right?
Actively suppressed is right. This was the era of Jim Crow laws systematically rolling back Reconstruction gains, limiting African-American civil rights at every turn.
Denying access to public accommodations, stripping legal protections.
Systematically taking away voting rights through literacy tests, poll taxes, and the infamous Plessy v. Ferguson ruling in 1896 legally enshrined segregation, separate but equal.
Though facilities were definitely not equal.
Definitely not. A systematic disenfranchisement, a profound, legally sanctioned restriction of freedom for millions, starkly illustrating how legal definitions of freedom can be used to perpetuate deep inequality, which immediately raises that important question. Who truly benefits from economic progress? And what happens when the free market, lauded as a source of liberty, starts to feel anything but free, particularly for those struggling?
And that brings us to the farmers, right? A powerful new force challenging the status quo.
Exactly. Western farmers in the late 19th century, facing what they saw as deeply unfair freight rates from powerful railroads, increasingly burdened by crippling debt. Our sources highlight how they organized first locally then nationally, demanding greater government control over the economy, a profoundly different vision of economic freedom.
One where government actively intervened for fairness, not just letting market forces run wild.
Precisely. The movement started with groups like the Grange movement in the 1870s, pressuring states on freight rates. It then blossomed into the People's Party, or populists, Their 1892 Omaha platform was remarkably progressive, advocated for the sub-treasury plan government loans to farmers using stored grain as collateral, bypassing predatory banks.
What else? Government ownership of railroads.
Yes, a precursor to Amtrak, also graduated income tax, eventually the 16th Amendment, government control of currency, like the Federal Reserve, and explicit recognition of labor union rights. Their vision was about collective protection and opportunity.
But they struggled to build a broader coalition. Industrial workers weren't really on board.
Largely not, primarily due to fears of inflation from the populist call for the free coinage of silver. That would have hurt urban laborers by raising prices. Racism also tragically hindered unity, despite some leaders like Tom Watson arguing for black and white poor farmers to unite against common economic adversaries.
And William Jennings Bryan, he ran on their platform.
Well, he was the Democratic nominee in 1896, but he passionately supported free silver, his famous Cross of Gold speech. He lost to McKinley in what's often called the first modern political campaign, due to huge corporate funding for McKinley. But despite their electoral defeat, many populist ideas, direct election of senators, progressive income tax, eventually became mainstream, underscoring their lasting impact on defining economic freedom and government's role.
So given these immense shifts, what did this all mean for freedom in an increasingly industrial urban America? Enter the progressive era, trying to solve problems through action, but sometimes their solutions had their own limitations on freedom.
That's the core insight, yeah. The progressive era believed in addressing industrial problems through scientific expertise and government intervention. This led to both significant improvements in social conditions and, at times, new restrictions on individual liberties, that inherent tension, balancing individual freedom with collective good.
Like the muckrakers exposing problems. Upton Sinclair.
Exactly. Sinclair's The Jungle in 1906, exposing the horrors of meatpacking plants, led directly to the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. Similarly, Lewis Hines' powerful photography documented child labor, contributing to laws limiting it at a time when over 2 million kids under 15 were working for wages. Clear expansions of safety and well-being, but achieved through increased government regulation.
And worker conditions were a huge focus. Henry Ford's $5 day.
Famous example. While seemingly benevolent, it was a strategic business decision to make workers consumers of his cars, boost output, lower prices. But it wasn't universal. Many employers remained fiercely anti-union, leading to the labor problem. Mechanization reduced skilled work, and factory routines based on Taylorism or scientific management eroded worker autonomy significantly.
Like having defined number of bathroom breaks.
Our sources mention that, yeah. A stark, even absurd example of the erosion of freedom and dignity in the workplace.
So this era saw a new idea emerge. An activist government could actually enhance freedom by regulating industry, protecting citizens.
A novel concept then, yes. A big departure from earlier, limited government ideas. While federal successes in expanding freedom were sometimes limited, often resulting in top-down restrictions like prohibition, local progressive efforts were often more successful. Establishing public control of utilities like gas and water, raising taxes for transportation and schools. Some urban progressives even advocated for city managers, chosen by expertise, applying scientific management to governance itself.
And then you had the progressive presidents, Theodore Roosevelt, the trust buster.
TR, yeah, famous trust buster, pioneering conservationist national parks, Nobel Peace Prize winner. His speak softly and carry a big stick. Foreign policy meant intervening in Latin America when deemed necessary.
Like the Panama Canal construction, the Roosevelt corollary, asserting U.S. police power.
Right, international police power in the Western Hemisphere to ensure stability for American investment. Freedom, but often enforced through American might.
And Taft, his successor, more conservative.
More conservative, yes, but still a trust buster broke up Standard Oil, which even TR hadn't managed. Supported the 16th Amendment, income tax, a key progressive idea, though he famously disappointed Roosevelt by firing conservationist Gifford Pinchot. Taft's dollar diplomacy emphasized economic investment over military force, but still aimed at expanding American influence and thus its economic freedom globally.
And finally, Woodrow Wilson, New Freedom.
Wilson championed his New Freedom agenda, aiming to restore market competition, curb big business with stronger antitrust laws. His moral diplomacy also involved interventions.
Like sending troops to Mexico to teach Mexicans to elect good men.
Exactly. Blending moral justification with military intervention, often with complicated results for other nations' freedom, and of course the big paradox, prohibition, the 18th Amendment.
A huge restriction on individual freedom, but a key progressive achievement.
Supported widely by women, often to curb drunken husbands and protect families. An expansion of social control for a healthier society, but a clear limit on individual choice.
So, the progressive era, grappling with that tension between economic growth, social justice, individual freedom, setting precedents for government involvement that still define our lives.
Absolutely. It essentially laid the groundwork for the modern regulatory state and the ongoing debate about its proper role in relation to freedom.
20th century to present freedom, power, and crises.
Okay, moving into the 20th century, World War I hits, profoundly impacting America at home, dramatically expanding government power,
Yeah.
all in the name of national unity and safety, reshaping the boundaries of liberty.
It's truly striking. The U.S., despite initial neutrality, enters WWI, fundamentally transforming the federal government's role in the economy and civil liberties, ostensibly, to make the world safe for democracy. Our entry was complex.
Yeah.
Huge loans to Britain, $2 billion. The Zimmerman telegram intercept revealing that German plot involving Mexico.
Right, encouraging Mexico to attack the U.S.
And the fall of the Tsarist regime in Russia, making Wilson's democracy versus autocracy rhetoric more plausible.
And the government's expansion of power was just unprecedented.
Totally. The Selective Service Act drafted 24 million men, Army swelled to 5 million. New agencies like the War Industries Board took extraordinary control setting quotas, prices, even the color of shoes to conserve materials. The Railroad Administration, Fuel Agency regulated transport and energy. The War Labor Board even pushed for minimum wage, 8-hour days, union rights leading to substantial wage increases, skyrocketing union membership.
And taxes went way up on the wealthy.
Reached 60% on the wealthiest. A significant temporary shift towards collective wartime effort.
But this came at a heavy cost for civil liberties.
A very heavy cost. Randolph Bourne's observation that war is the health of the state proved chillingly accurate. The Espionage Act of 1917 banned spying or false statements hindering the military. Even worse was the Sedition Act of 1918, criminalizing statements casting contempt, scorn, or disrepute on the government or war effort, effectively made criticism a crime.
Eugene Debs, jailed for an anti-war speech, ran for president from prison.
Famously did. The Supreme Court upheld these convictions, Schenck v. S., setting a precedent for limiting speech during wartime. We also saw extreme repression, slacker raids, the Bisbee deportation, where striking miners were put in boxcars and abandoned in the desert. Stark limits on freedom for national security.
And this intense push for Americanization? Forcing conformity.
Yes, government-backed. Public schools explicitly used to implant Anglo-Saxon conceptions of righteousness, law, and order into immigrant kids. Loyalty Day replaced the 4th of July.
Liberty sandwiches instead of hamburgers.
Seriously.
Seriously. Racing German associations, anti-immigrant sentiment justified by the war, IQ tests even controversially used to argue certain immigrant groups were inferior. Shows how easily national unity morphs into suppressing dissent and diversity, all for a collective freedom defined by the state.
But after that intense wartime expansion, we get the Roaring Twenties. Often romanticized prosperity, new consumer freedoms, but masking deeper vulnerabilities. Exactly. It's fascinating to look back. The 1920s did have an undeniable economic boom, a burgeoning consumer culture, new social liberties, particularly for women. But a crucial insight. This prosperity was remarkably unevenly distributed, ultimately setting the stage for the catastrophic collapse that followed.
What drove the growth? Cars? Movies?
Big drivers, yeah. Corporate expansion overseas, the U.S. dollar replacing the pound internationally, U.S. producing 85% of the world's cars. Movies became a major leisure product, fueling Hollywood's rise, shaping culture.
And credit became acceptable, going into debt.
A key element of this new consumer freedom. Widespread credit and layaway plans shifted attitudes. Became acceptable to go into debt to maintain the American standard of living. A huge psychological shift.
And women gained opportunities. Economic, political, birth control advocacy.
Yes, greater opportunities owning property, controlling wages. Birth control advocates like Margaret Sanger argued for limiting pregnancies for work and autonomy. Marketers even sold cigarettes as torches of freedom to women.
Torches of freedom.
Wow. But traditional expectations persisted. Oh, yeah. Expectations to marry, have kids, find freedom at home through new appliances still held sway. A more constrained vision of female freedom.
And connecting this to the bigger picture, the prosperity wasn't universal at all.
Far from it. Real industrial wages rose 25%, 1922-29, but corporate profits doubled that rate, worsening inequality. By 1929, 1% of banks controlled 50% of financial resources. The wealthiest 5% earned more than the bottom 60%.
40% still lived in poverty, despite the roaring 20s.
Estimated 40%, yeah. Farmers struggled immensely as WWI subsidies ended, leading to foreclosures. And deindustrialization began subtly. Textile companies moving south for cheaper labor, foreshadowing future shifts.
And social tensions were high, despite talk of tolerance.
Incredibly high.
Yeah.
Lynchings rose, immigration severely restricted based on fear of radicals and crude pseudoscientific ideas about race. President Coolidge's famous quote, "America must be kept American,"
And the Scopes trial, science versus religion,
starkly highlighted those tensions. The freedoms celebrated by some were clearly not extended to all. The seeds of future economic and social crises were deeply sown in that supposedly prosperous decade. Which brings us, inevitably, to the Great Depression, and raises that critical question again. What happens when profound economic hardship and social change force a fundamental reevaluation of government's role? Who gets to define freedom for a new era?
Right. The Depression shattered old ideas of individual responsibility, necessitating a new understanding of government's role in securing economic freedom, basic well-being.
Unequivocally, Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal fundamentally reshaped that relationship between the federal government and citizens. The government became, as one contemporary put it, a custodian of freedom from economic distress.
FDR acted fast, ending prohibition.
Good for tax revenue and morale. And the immediate bank holiday, the Emergency Banking Act of 1933, creating the FDIC ensuring deposits, crucially restoring public confidence in the financial system.
And the first New Deal programs, CCC, AAA, and IRA.
Rapid creation of groundbreaking programs. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, paid youth to build national parks. The Agricultural Adjustment Act, AAA, aimed to boost farm prices. The Glass-Steagall Act barred commercial banks from speculative stock trading. The National Industrial Recovery Act, NIRA, fostered government business collaboration on standards.
Direct aid, too. And the TVA.
Direct aid via FARA. And the controversial Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, built dams for flood control, cheap power, directly putting government in competition with private companies. A bold move, then.
But the Supreme Court pushed back initially.
Forcefully. Struck down key programs like AAA and NIRA, arguing they unconstitutionally delegated legislative powers, overstepped federal authority regulating local business.
Which led to FDR's controversial court packing plan.
Yeah, his attempt to expand the court faced backlash, but the court eventually did start upholding New Deal laws through a broad reading of the Commerce Clause, fundamentally expanding federal power over the economy, a profound shift in ensuring economic freedom.
And the second New Deal, WPA, Social Security,
introduced even more impactful programs. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, employed $3 million annually, building infrastructure and supporting arts, a broader view of valuable work. Most profoundly, Social Security, funded by payroll taxes, transformed federal citizen relations. Government help in economic distress became an enduring expectation.
This also led to a huge political realignment, Democrats gaining new voters.
Massive. African Americans, unions, women became reliable Democratic votes. However, Southern Democrats, crucial for passing legislation, ensured local administration often excluded sharecroppers, tenant farmers, revealing persistent racial inequalities and New Deal freedoms.
And WWII ultimately ended the Depression.
Many economists credit the massive government spending during WWII, But the New Deal cemented a new definition of liberalism, moving from 19th century limited government to expecting active government intervention for basic economic freedom and well-being.
Okay, moving beyond the Depression. World War II and the Cold War continued reshaping freedom, pushing America onto the world stage in a new way.
Absolutely transformative. WWII reshaped America's economy and global role, solidified that new liberalism, prompted a reevaluation of American identity. The war decisively ended the Depression, GNP more than doubled by 44. Federal spending was twice the amount of the previous 150 years combined. Fueled unprecedented production. Defense spending created new industrial centers on the West Coast, like LA becoming the second largest manufacturing hub. Showed the power of government-directed economic mobilization.
And the war expanded the definition of freedom, but with contradictions.
Both, yes. Henry Luce's The American Century envisioned sharing U.S. products and ideals like love of freedom globally. Conversely, Hayek's The Road to Serfdom criticized government planning as a threat to liberty foundational for later conservatives. The fight against Nazi racism paradoxically pushed Americanism towards meaning diversity, tolerance, and equality at home, highlighting the hypocrisy of segregation. Yet, anti-Semitism, race riots, Detroit Zoot Suit persisted, and tragically, Japanese-American internment under Executive Order 9066, a stark contradiction.
And the Double V campaign.
African Americans seizing the moment, victory over Axis abroad, victory over racism at home, made ending segregation and achieving Black equality cornerstones of post-war American liberalism.
And after the war, the U.S. becomes the financial leader. Bretton Woods, UN.
Undisputed leader. Bretton Woods system, dollar replaces pound, World Bank, IMF established, leading role in the United Nations Permanent Security Council member, signaled a new era of active international engagement, asserting American ideals globally.
But then the Cold War emerged. Freedom defined starkly against totalitarianism, leading to domestic fear.
Precisely. U.S. and USSR, the two superpowers. America's containment policy, Truman Doctrine, pledged support to freedom-loving peoples against communism, led to new, often secretive security apparatus, NSC, CIA, AEC, largely immune from government oversight, immense unchecked power.
And domestically, anti-communism limited Truman's social policies. Loyalty reviews.
Yes, limited the fair deal. The loyalty review system required government employees to prove patriotism. The Red Scare, fueled by McCarthyism, created pervasive fear, criminalizing even being a communist leader, Dennis v. United States. Criticism of government equated with disloyalty. Freedom defined not as dissent, but as government protection from destruction. A chilling redefinition where collective safety trumped individual expression.
Yet despite that Cold War conformity, the promise of freedom wasn't fully realized for many, leading to powerful movements demanding fundamental change.
Absolutely transformative period. The 1950s and 60s saw the civil rights movement achieve monumental victories, inspiring other rights revolutions, challenging systemic inequality, pushing for radically expanded definitions of freedom for all. While the 50s is often seen as consensus culture, economic expansion for many white Americans, a crucial insight is that rigid segregation de jure in the South, de facto in the North, persisted for African Americans. Housing, jobs, education. Half of Black families lived in poverty. Cliques like Reisman, the Lonely Crowd, and Galbraith, the Affluent Society, questioned conformity and underfunding of public goods.
The civil rights movement had deep roots, but the 50s saw breakthroughs. Mendez v. Westminster, Brown v. Board.
Significant breakthroughs, yes. Mendez desegregated California schools for Latinos in 46, preceding Brown v. Board in 54. Brown famously ruled segregation inherently unequal, psychologically damaging, but met with massive resistance in the South. School closures, private academies, showed the deep entrenchment of racial unfreedom.
Direct action became key. Rosa Parks, MLK, Little Rock.
Central to the movement, Rosa Parks' courage, sparking the 381-day Montgomery bus boycott, thrusting MLK into prominence, highlighting Black churches' role. Eisenhower sending the 101st Airborne to integrate Little Rock's Central High in 57 against Governor Faubus, asserting federal authority.
Culminating in major legislative victories. Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act.
Monumental achievements under LBJ's Great Society. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, ending discriminatory quotas, dramatically expanded who could fully partake in American freedom.
But persistent poverty led to a shift. Black power, riots.
Yeah, persistent poverty and discrimination, especially in northern cities, led to a shift from integration. Riots in Watts, Newark, Detroit revealed legal equality didn't automatically mean economic or social freedom. Black power philosophies emphasized Black culture, criticized white oppression.
And this inspired other movements. Environmental, feminist.
Powerfully so. The environmental movement gained traction with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, leading to Nixon's Clean Air Water Acts. The American feminist movement, marked by Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique describing the problem that has no name, misogyny challenged the constricting social and economic system for women, demanding greater freedom and autonomy. Which brings us to the 70s, and that profound period of social upheaval and economic struggle, raising that question again. What happens when hardship and change force a reevaluation of government's role? Who gets to define freedom when confidence wavers?
Right. The economic struggles of the 70s led to that crisis of confidence, fueled a powerful conservative backlash, fundamentally redefining freedom in terms of limited government, economic liberty.
Decade plagued by turmoil, deficits, dollar off gold standard, global competition, manufacturing decline, union job losses.
And the oil shocks of 73 and 79, triggered by OPEC embargo Iranian revolution, led to stagflation, high inflation plus high unemployment, the misery index.
And real wages stalled for decades. Our sources say, beginning in 1973, real wages essentially did not rise for 20 years, deeply impacting living standards, eroding that post-war promise. This malaise fueled political disillusionment. Carter's crisis of confidence speech, often remembered for criticizing Americans.
Setting the stage for the rise of conservatism, Goldwater in 64, Nixon's Southern strategy.
Goldwater championed free markets, criticized big government, won Southern states signaling shifting alignments. Nixon's Southern strategy appealed to the silent majority alarmed by the rights revolution, often equating crime with African Americans. Even the liberal Burger Court, upholding busing and affirmative action, Bakes contributed to backlash with rulings like Roe v. Wade in 73, establishing abortion rights.
Which galvanized religious conservatives, fearing deteriorating traditional family values, opposing Title IX, the ERA.
Exactly. For many, freedom increasingly meant freedom from government interference in personal morality and economic affairs.
Leading to the Reagan Revolution in 1980.
A profound shift, yeah. Reagan's diverse coalition, economic conservatives, social conservatives, Cold War hawks, fundamentally redefined freedom as primarily economic freedom. Curtailing unions, reducing federal regulation, lowering taxes, supply-side economics aimed to encourage work, saving, investment, though initial recession, 81-82, and stagnant wages followed for many.
But government spending didn't actually shrink that much. Deficits grew.
Right. Social Security, Medicare, defense spending continued, increasing deficits. The Iran-Contra affair highlighted delegation issues, but also a more assertive, sometimes covert foreign policy. Importantly, Reagan did negotiate nuclear reductions with Gorbachev, a notable achievement.
Finally, we arrive at the turn of the millennium, recent decades. The debate over freedom shaped by new global realities, crises, polarization.
Insightful to see how, from the Cold War's end to the global financial crisis and beyond, America wrestled with its world role and freedom's meaning amidst turbulence. George H.W. Bush, 1988-92, oversaw the Cold War's end Berlin Wall, START treaties. Persian Gulf War banished the Vietnam syndrome, he claimed. Domestically, struggled with the vision thing, faced a Democratic Congress, but signed the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act, 1991. The Rodney King riots revealed huge fissures. A 1990-91 recession with job losses contributed to his re-election defeat. Economic anxiety trumped foreign policy.
Then George W. Bush, 2000-2008, contested election.
Historically contested, yeah. Florida recount, Supreme Court, domestic policies, large tax cuts, no child left behind. But post 9/11, foreign policy dominated, global war on terror, axis of evil. The 2003 Iraq invasion, based on false WMD claims, non-existent al-Qaeda link, led to high costs, casualties, reshaped global security versus intervention debates. Domestically, a jobless recovery, continued manufacturing job losses. Second term defined by the housing bubble bursting 07, banking system near collapse 08. Reopened debates on financial freedom, regulation.
And Barack Obama, 2008-2016, elected amidst the financial fartstorm.
Apt description from our sources. Low interest rates, subprime mortgages, toxic assets, credit freeze, market collapse, job losses, more women than men holding jobs by mid-2009. Obama's massive stimulus package estimated saved 3 million jobs, increased deficit sparked intense Keynesian versus conservative debate on economic freedom. The Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, aimed for universal health care access, became a huge source of controversy.
Reopening that question, freedom from government and healthcare, or freedom to access healthcare guaranteed by government.
Exactly. His administration faced extreme political polarization, Tea Party influence, ideological rigidity, dysfunction, despite slow economic recovery. Foreign policy. Increased troops in Afghanistan, bin Laden killed, but continued Bush-era drone use, expanded executive power in the war on terror. These recent decades underscore that the struggle over defining freedom remains as dynamic and contested as ever. Outro.
So from those whispers of revolution in the early republic to the roar of modern debate, the very idea of freedom in America has truly been a constantly moving target. It's been about land, about faith, about work, about the scope and power of government, and perhaps most crucially, about who genuinely gets to partake in its evolving promise.
Yeah, this deep dive really reveals that freedom isn't some static concept, a neatly defined historical artifact. It's a dynamic, contested, and ever-evolving space. Different groups continuously push for their understanding of liberty to be recognized and fully realized. It's a story of remarkable, undeniable progress, but also of profound, ongoing contradictions and exclusions that continue to shape our present.
So, as you reflect on this continuous, often turbulent evolution of freedom throughout American history, what surprising insights does it suggest about our present challenges?
And perhaps even more importantly, what responsibility do you, the listener, have in shaping its meaning for the future of the nation? Something to think about.